it's Doris with Holiday Books, and I have my second half of September wrap up here. I finished a few more books. Here, I think I've read 12 books in September. Anyway, March, I finally finished the third one in this series. This is a timeline. I feel like I've said this a million times, but it's worth repeating. This is a timeline of the Civil Rights Movement starting when John Lewis, who is a U.S. Senator, was a young boy, and it travels through Obama's inauguration, his first inauguration, and it is fabulous. This is a trilogy, and you need to read it. If you're at all interested in the Civil Rights Movement in the United States, this is an excellent way to get an overall picture of how that developed and played out. Highly recommend these books. They're informational, but they're also emotional and just very impactful and beautiful. The artwork is great. So, and then I read The Clothing of Books by Jhumpa Lahiri. This isn't exactly what I expected. She's a little more negative on book covers, which I can totally understand. You know, she talks about being an author and not being in control of what her books look like. It's just interesting thoughts, an essay, or a little collection of thoughts put together on book covers. And I'm just very intrigued by Jhumpa Lahiri intellectually. So I don't know if you watched my recent reading vlog, but I picked up The Lowlands, which I will mention again in a moment. So I think I'm going to read that pretty soon. I want to read all of her works now. I'm just curious about her. Okay, and then, oh, there's a bookmark. I finished Heartless by Marissa Meyer, and this was something else entirely, truly. This was written to be a companion novel to Alice in Wonderland. It tells the story of how the Queen of Hearts became the Queen of Hearts. It starts out when she is an older teen, like she's thinking about what she wants to do with her life, and she's obviously a part of the aristocracy, but she really wants to open a bakery. And it's fantasy. It's fairly high fantasy, but not your typical, you know, elves and dwarfs, obviously. It's in the Alice in Wonderland world, that sort of fantasy world. And it's very whimsical, the way Alice in Wonderland is, but it's more plot driven than Alice in Wonderland. So it's not quite as quirky with, you know, random events. There's a definite plot. And I can't tell you anything else because I don't want to spoil it for you, but this was a really, I thought, a really good book, and I think it would open up some interesting conversations with teenagers. Many themes to talk about. So yeah, I liked that one. And then I finished The Trouble with Goats and Sheep by Joanna Cannon, which has been a BookTube darling recently. This was very atmospheric. Just, it's in England in the, is it the 60s or 70s? I can't remember. There was a heat wave, apparently. A heat wave that people remember. And it's billed as a mystery, but I have to give a disclaimer. This is literary fiction, and I would side more on the literary fiction than on the mystery side of things. There is somewhat of a mystery, but it's the literary fiction that carries the novel. So these two little girls, they're around 10, I think. Their neighbor goes missing, and they end up looking for her and looking for God, and it's all in this storyline. And the little girls, they're imperfect, and I love that they didn't write them to be these, you know, perfect, precocious girls. They're flawed. At least one of the main one is, our protagonist. But she's she's still just a lovely, delightful thing. And the resolution between those little girls is just, it's beautiful. That part of the story just carries the novel. If you're going into it looking for a mystery, if that's your thing, it's not my thing, so I totally enjoyed this. But the mystery aspect of it is not quite as strong, not nearly as strong. So, and actually I was not completely happy with the resolution of the mystery. I think normally in a lot of books I'm okay with leaving some things hanging, but I think they left too much unresolved and unspoken at the end of this. So, what else was I going to say about this? I think I'm going to have to stop this video. Oh, I remembered. If you've read this, I wanted to mention the drainpipe chapters. I thought those were so charming. If you've read it and you thought the drainpipe chapters were charming, mention it in the comments below, because I just thought the little bit of tongue-in-cheek sarcasm was just spot on. Those made me laugh. Okay, and then I read Beast of No Nation, a novel by Uzodinma Iweala, and wow. Several of you mentioned seeing the movie and how brutal it was, and this book is so brutal. This deals with war, and it doesn't really mention what country in Africa, and it doesn't even mention the reason for the war. So you've got all this brutality and these warlike environments going on, and it's more like guerrilla warfare. It is guerrilla warfare that you read about in here, and there's never any reason for it, and I think that might be part of what he's trying to say. I did like his linguistics. It's one of my pet peeves in novels when the novelist will try to write a speech pattern and he's not effective in carrying it through throughout the novel. You know, sometimes he does and sometimes it drops. This guy just is really good linguistically. He developed a very interesting speech pattern for the boy who's telling the story. The boy is probably, you know, 12 to 14-year-old age and becomes involved in the war and recruited as a boy soldier. So the speech pattern is very interesting to read. I enjoyed that. It's totally brutal. There's a pedophile and there's brutality with children, both against the child and the child conducting the brutality. So this is not at all for the lighthearted. Midway through, I was kind of, wasn't liking it, but it ended up pretty strong in what it said. So yeah, it was solid. And then I am not done with the Behemoth, but I wanted to mention it anyway. I've finished the first volume and I'm putting it aside for the month of October because I'm doing so many readathons that are unrelated. So, and with Victober, I felt like I'd be reading a lot of heavy tomes. And so I'm going to just pick this back up in November. But I wanted to mention the contrast between these two. I'm sure that the war will pick up in brutality. I'm not sure, but I assume. But it's just so, the contrast here. In here you've got war, just, it's almost like little boys playing with toy soldiers, and they're so proud of themselves and how pretty they look and how pretty their horses are and their banners, and you're not really looking at the actual soldiers as much. It's all more the aristocracy that are leading the soldiers, and it's interesting. And then you've got it contrasted with this one, which is just the actual physicality of what happens in war. And instead of boys playing at war, you've got boys as soldiers. And so I'm not knocking War and Peace at all. So far, I'm loving it, and I'm really picking up a lot from it. But just, and I do think that it's gonna talk more directly about war soon, the actual brutality of war. But just right now in this moment, the contrast just was very thought-provoking. I just wanted to mention that. And then speaking of war, this was the last one that I've read, and actually I just finished it today, but I wanted to include this in my September wrap-up. And this, because this was a read-along with Jenny King, and I didn't really read it along with anybody. I just kind of read it on my own, but I'm finished with it now and ready to talk about it. And whoa, this is, if you're into literary fiction, and if you like intellectual writing and informational writing, I mean, this has got so much science and Japanese culture and history woven into it. Current culture, well, current-ish. Most of this is set in from 2000 onward, but it doesn't read like contemporary fiction. This book is fascinating, and the second half, I mean, it just starts coming out of nowhere, and it is so deep and profound. It just kind of blew me away, the ending. Not just the ending, but the whole, like, last quarter of the book was just one deep thing after another, and you're just sitting there going, whoa, so many deep thoughts. But this is basically a woman and her husband are living on an isolated island off the coast of Canada, and the woman finds a Hello Kitty lunchbox wrapped in many, many Ziploc bags. So inside she finds all these letters and a couple diaries and things that have washed over from Japan from the big tsunami. And so it's just her reading this, and then so the chapters flop between current time with the woman on the island and earlier in the 2000s, this girl talking about her life and also the life of her 104-year-old Buddhist grandmother. This is major stuff here. I actually was like, because it says it was a Man Booker finalist in 2013. I'm like, if this one is this deep, I want to know who won. And I looked it up, and it was The Luminaries. So I'm going to have to read The Luminaries. And also the Jhumpa Lahiri book, The Lowlands, that I mentioned, was also a finalist this year. So I'm very curious to read those two, just to see. I think it was a bumper crop literary fiction year. Definitely. So that's what I've got for September. It was another great reading month. I'm just reading so many awesome books lately. It's very exciting. Oh, one more thing. If you have read Heartless, or you're going to read Heartless, the beginning of the world in the middle of the night, I think, would just be so cool with that. The first short story in here is so weird and cool. It's about the loss of love and emotion, and but it's written in this experimental way where people are given new hearts from different animals and things, and it's just bizarre and cool, and it just fits in so well with some of the ideas in the end of Heartless. So anyway, I think that would be an interesting conversation. I'm actually going to read this short story again because I just thought of that when I was reading. I was like, oh, that is such a cool pairing right there. Yeah. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I will be back soon.